Just a new nurse. That's what they said when Katie Rodriguez walked through the staff entrance of St. Michael's Hospital in Raleigh on a Tuesday morning in March, her scrub still holding the creases from the packaging, her badge laminate catching fluorescent light like a beacon announcing her incompetence. 8 months. She had 8 months to be invisible, 8 months to catalogue Dr. Mercer's billing patterns before the Pentagon's evidence package went cold, and invisibility required exactly this, being dismissed before she opened her mouth. The smell hit her first. Not the antiseptic. The underlying current beneath it. Human bodies breaking down. Fluorescent lights humming their familiar frequency. Somewhere a monitor beeped its mechanical rhythm, steady as a metronome marking time in a place where time moved differently. Katie had learned to read that sound in Kandahar. Beeping meant alive. Silence meant something else entirely. Her locker sat on the 3rd floor, emergency department, tucked between a surgical resident named Chen who left 3 family photos and a cardiologist named Barnes who left nothing but a thermos. Katie folded her civilian clothes into the small metal box and stared at the folded flag for exactly 2 seconds before closing her hand around it. Green. Canvas. The weight of Marco's funeral in a piece of fabric that would have made a grown Marine cry if he hadn't already done all his crying in 2019. She locked the flag inside. The captain's bar stayed in her locker too, gold insignia from a rank the Pentagon had told her to bury so deep that even Katie sometimes forgot which version of herself was real. 12 years of service. 3 tours through Helmand Province. 2 silver stars and the kind of surgical precision that could read a combat wound like other people read faces. All of it went into that locker and stayed there. The nurse's station existed in a particular hierarchy of fluorescence and keyboard clatter. 7 nurses, 1 secretary, and a rhythm so established that new people fit into it the way water fits into a cup. You became the shape of the hole you were poured into. Katie took the assignments without comment. 3 post-op patients. 1 trauma observation. 1 ward admission from the VA. She said thank you and meant none of it. Dr. Mercer arrived during shift orientation at 7:45, late enough to make a point about his importance and early enough to control the room. He was the kind of tool that required suits to convince him of it, tailored navy with a watch that cost more than Katie's car. His handshake felt like a financial instrument, all pressure and no warmth. He smiled at the residents. He made eye contact with the nurses who had been there longer than 3 weeks. He looked through Katie as if she were made of glass. "We have new blood," he said to the assembled staff, not to her. "Always good to have enthusiasm. Less good to have enthusiasm without judgment." He moved to a patient's chart on the desk, flipped it open with the casual authority of someone who had never been questioned. Post-op hemorrhage doesn't happen in good hospitals. It happens in sloppy hospitals where people make assumptions instead of reading orders. He held up the chart. Katie recognized it immediately. Bilateral knee replacement. Routine recovery. Perfect vitals. This is what happens when new staff overspecify in their documentation. Uncertainty. Liability. Waste. Nobody moved. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Somewhere down the hallway, and 4 pump chimed softly. Katie updated the post-op patient's dressing without making any observations beyond what the surgeon had specifically ordered. She didn't note the slight ooze at the incision edge. She didn't document the mild tachycardia. She charted only what would not cause Dr. Mercer's face to cloud with that particular shade of irritation she had already learned to recognize. By the 3rd day, she understood the equation. Invisibility required erasure of the kind of thoroughness that had kept 214 Marines breathing in field conditions. The Pentagon had sent her here to collect evidence, to document the billing patterns, the unnecessary imaging, the repeated procedures on veteran patients already bleeding the VA's resources dry, the coded charges that didn't match the actual work performed. Fine. She could be precise in her documentation of fraud while being deliberately vague about everything else. She could read a patient and chart nothing. The work itself felt simple after a decade of combat trauma. For starts on sleeping patients. Wound checks with no stakes attached. medication administration with no rounds of gunfire echoing from compound walls. The other nurses treated her the way new things are treated in established systems, with the tolerance you extend to temporary annoyances. The second-year resident named Torres actually made eye contact once, asked her name, seemed like he might develop into something resembling a human interaction. Dr. Mercer made sure that didn't happen. He reassigned Katie's post-op patients to Torres for discharge paperwork, then reassigned Torres to another floor for the afternoon. He scheduled Katie's breaks during the only hours when she might have spoken to anyone. He was competent about it. Strategic. Not crude. No shouting. Just the quiet, institutional machinery of professional elimination, the kind of pressure that accumulated like weight underwater. For pounds per square inch. 8 pounds. 16. The vending machine sat near the staff break room. Katie had learned not to use it, had learned that hunger could be managed, that thirst could be managed, that visibility of any need was a vulnerability Dr. Mercer seemed to catalogue with the intensity of a medieval scholar cataloguing sins. She was reaching for coffee on the 7th day when he found her in front of the machine with Torres and Chen's husband, a trauma surgeon from the VA hospital in Durham. New nurses, Dr. Mercer said, approaching with the smile of someone about to make a joke he had planned in advance. I know the salary situation can be tight. Loans. Student debt. Single income. You must be stressed about money. He reached into his pocket and produced 2 quarters, held them out like an offering to a shrine. Vending machine takes quarters. Coffee is cheaper than prescription antidepressants. So. The room went dead silent. The fluorescent lights buzzed their frequency. Chen's husband looked away. Torres found something interesting about the floor. Katie took the quarters because not taking them would require explanation. An explanation would require existing enough to have opinions. Thanks, she said. New nurses always struggle, Dr. Mercer said, watching her face, hunting for the tremor he expected, the flush of shame, the moisture in the eyes that would confirm his assessment. It's important to know you have support. Katie put the quarters into the machine and pressed B7. The coffee fell. The mechanical hiss of it. The smell of something approximating caffeine. She turned around and made eye contact with Dr. Mercer for exactly 2 seconds, held his gaze with the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. Thank you for your concern, she said. And in that moment, she saw something flicker across his face. Not anger yet. Not threat yet. Just the small, cold recognition that his assessment might have been incomplete. That the quiet new nurse might not respond to pressure in the ways he had anticipated. It wasn't a request. It was a test, and both of them knew she had just failed it by not breaking. He turned and walked toward his office, already reaching for his phone. Thursday morning at St. Michael's arrived like any other, the same fluorescent hum, the same antiseptic burn in the back of Katie's throat, the same weight of invisibility she wore like a second skin. Grand round started at 8 a.m. in the main conference room on the 3rd floor. 23 physicians, 14 nurse residents, 7 administrative staff. Katie stood in the back corner near the whiteboard, her tablet open, her face the careful blank of someone who belonged nowhere important. Dr. Mercer commanded the room the way apex predators command a feeding ground, not through volume but through the absolute certainty that everyone was watching. He was tall, silver-haired at 56, wearing a shirt that probably cost more than Katie's monthly rent. His watch caught the light. Rolex. GMT Master 2. She'd seen it in the personnel file. Everything about him broadcast privilege earned and power held. Let's discuss patient outcomes, Mercer said, his voice smooth as engine oil. I've been reviewing recent charts, and there's a concerning pattern emerging. He held up a folder. Katie's folder. Her recent patient documentation on a 67-year-old veteran named Thomas Garrett, admitted with chest pain, scheduled for cardiac catheterization. Katie had charted every vital sign fluctuation, every medication response, every micro-detail of his post-operative status. 23 pages in 5 days. Comprehensive. Precise. Utterly devastating to anyone trying to hide unnecessary procedures. This is what happens when nursing staff get creative, Mercer continued, flipping through her notes with theatrical slowness. Dangerous overspecification that wastes physician time. We're here to treat patients, not write novels. Standard protocols exist for a reason. 20 faces turned toward Katie. She felt them, the residents looking for weakness, the attending physicians calculating whether this was about her or about defending their own documentation standards, the administrators already distancing themselves from whatever was about to happen. Katie took one measured breath. She didn't look away. She didn't let her shoulders curl inward. She met Dr. Mercer's eyes across the room, steady as a rifle sight. And in that moment, something broke inside her that had been held together by training and protocol. A single tear escaped. Just one. She didn't blink it away frantically or turn her face to hide it. She let it slide down her cheek and continued to hold his gaze while her hand rose and wiped it, slow and deliberate, as if she were wiping away something far worse than salt water. "The only thing I struggle with, Dr. Mercer," she said, her voice quiet enough that people had to lean forward to hear it, "is watching patients become line items." The room didn't gasp. That would have been too dramatic. Instead, the room did something worse, it held its breath. 12 seconds of absolute silence. The ventilation system hummed. Someone's badge clattered against their stethoscope. Dr. Mercer's jaw tightened, the muscle working once, twice. "Security," he said, not looking away from Katie. "Escort Nurse Rodriguez out of this room for insubordination." Katie didn't wait. She set her tablet on the back table, turned, and walked toward the door. Her steps were measured. Her spine was straight. She was a captain in the United States Army, trained to move through hostile territory without flinching, and she would not give him the satisfaction of watching her rush or stumble. The security officer, a young man named Marcus who'd always held the ER door for her on night shifts, looked genuinely uncomfortable as he followed her into the hallway. "He's going to fire you," Marcus said quietly as they walked toward the elevator. "Probably," Katie replied. She didn't return to grand rounds. Instead, she went to the break room on the second floor and sat in the corner chair, the one with the broken left armrest, and pulled up her mission log on her burner phone. She encrypted the entry in real time, subject Mercer aware of documentation pattern. Social humiliation escalating to institutional retaliation. Cover integrity compromised. Evidence against primary target, 847 hours of charting cross-referenced with billing records, 23 unnecessary procedures, estimated fraudulent billing $340,000. Mission status, critical but continuing. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 3 days later. Katie was in the ER break room at 2:06 p.m. on a Sunday, her shift ending in 40 minutes, attempting to eat something that resembled a salad. The room was crowded, 2 residents, 3 nurses from pediatrics, an orthopedic surgeon scrolling through his phone. Mercer walked in like he'd been summoned by the universe itself, moving toward the vending machine in the corner with the casual authority of a man who'd never been told no in his life. He pulled for quarters from his pocket. Dropped them on the small table directly in front of Katie with a sound like dropped coins hitting a hardwood floor. "I know new nurses struggle financially," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Consider this a loan." Laughter rippled through the room. The pediatric nurses covered their mouths. One of the residents actually snorted. Katie's hand reached for her coffee mug. She felt the tremor start in her forearm, not from fear but from restraint, from every molecule of her trained muscle memory screaming to respond with something that would end his career in 4 seconds. She pressed her palm flat against the table, grounding herself. "I'm not struggling, doctor," she said, her voice level as surgical precision. "I'm documenting." She picked up the quarters, all 4 of them, and set them back on the table with the same careful deliberation she used when handling surgical instruments. Then she finished her salad in silence while Mercer stood there, his jaw working, his eyes cold as an operating room at midnight. He left without a word. That was worse. The next escalation came on Tuesday night during the medication room restock. Katie was pulling 1 milligram epinephrine ampules for the crash cart when Mercer cornered her between the locked cabinet and the wall, his voice dropping to something that sounded like a generator running underground. "You're on thin ice, Rodriguez. I don't know what your agenda is, but it stops now. One more instance of insubordination, one more chart that questions my clinical judgment, and I'll have security escort you out in front of the entire ER staff. Do we understand each other?" Katie nodded once. Just once. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't crack. "Yes, doctor." He left. She finished restocking the crash cart. Then she went to the break room, locked herself in the single-stall bathroom for exactly 3 minutes, and updated her encrypted log, primary target escalating. Sabotage phase initiated. Billing coordinator contacted. Chart scrubbing protocols active. Time to full institutional destruction, 72 hours maximum. The next morning, Katie received her assignment for Thursday. Circulating nurse for a Green Beret colonel, emergency cricothyrotomy, crushed larynx from a training accident, medevac incoming at 1,400 hours. She'd been waiting for this patient. Didn't know it until that moment, but she'd been waiting for someone whose rank would force her to care more than her cover could afford. Someone who would see what she was, not what she pretended to be. She scrubbed her hands, the soap burning the small cut on her left palm from field training 6 weeks ago. The scar tissue under her fingernails, from Kandahar, from holding pressure in a trauma bay while mortars landed 300 meters away, caught on the soap's surface. Pain is data. Pain is information. By 13:47 hours, she was in the surgical bay, gowning up, her movements economical and sure. The attending surgeon was already there, Dr. Chen, competent but nervous with emergency airways. The anesthesia team stood ready. The colonel was unconscious, already intubated from the medevac, his airway deteriorating by the minute. Katie watched as Dr. Chen made the first incision. Hesitant. Wavering. The blade didn't follow the cricothyroid membrane precisely. The oxygen saturation monitor displayed 74. Then 71. The room held its breath. Dr. Chen's hands trembled. Katie stepped forward. Not a suggestion. A movement. Guide your scalpel down. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. There. Her hands moved on their own. Muscle memory took over. Training that had never left her. The angle, the Kandahar angle, learned in a trauma bay under sustained fire, learned holding the line while rounds tore through the roof, guided the blade true and precise. 40 seconds. The hiss of air escaping as the needle decompression established. The airway secure. The colonel's oxygen saturation climbing, 75. 82, 88. Stable. Through the fog of sedation, the colonel's eyes opened. Unfocused at first, then sharpening, focusing directly on her hands. On the way she'd cut. On the angle of the blade. His lips moved. His voice was barely audible through the fresh airway, a whisper dragged from somewhere deep in a body that had seen combat. "That's a Kandahar cut. I'd know it anywhere." Katie leaned close, her voice urgent and low. "You didn't see anything, sir." But his eyes held recognition. Eyes that had survived exactly what she'd survived. Eyes that knew. She didn't see Dr. Mercer in the observation window. Didn't see him pull his phone from his pocket and text his billing coordinator in 3 words, "She's getting too close." That evening, Katie checked the colonel's post-operative chart. Her detailed procedure notes, every angle, every incision, every moment of her training made visible, were gone. Replaced with generic templates. Subject line, cricothyrotomy, standard approach. No specific technique noted. No documentation of who actually performed the procedure. Her evidence was being erased in real time. She had 72 hours before Mercer made the calls that would destroy her career. Before security would escort her out. before her mission would collapse under the weight of her own competence. She sat in her car in the parking lot, rain hammering the windshield like a countdown, and composed a single encrypted message to her handler, primary target escalating to sabotage phase. Patient evidence being destroyed. Recommend extraction authorization. Awaiting orders. The response came in 47 seconds, mission parameters unchanged. Continue mission. Backup en route to your location. Katie didn't know what backup meant. Didn't know if it meant the end of her career or the end of Dr. Mercer. She only knew that one way or another, the next 72 hours would change everything. The medevac helicopter touched down at St. Michael's at 6:44 a.m. on a Tuesday, its rotors still turning as the trauma team sprinted toward the landing pad. Katie was already moving before the page went out, 3 years of muscle memory screaming louder than her cover. The colonel came in on a stretcher with a crushed trachea, his larynx destroyed by a training accident that shouldn't have happened but did, the kind of thing that reminded you the world didn't care about your rank or your medals or how many people you'd saved. Blood pooled in the back of his throat. His oxygen saturation was already dropping. She caught his eyes for exactly 1 second as they wheeled past her station. Green eyes. The kind that had seen what she had seen. He was trying to communicate something through the oxygen mask, but the bleeding was too heavy, his windpipe already swelling shut. The attending surgeon, Dr. Hayes, called for an emergency intubation in the OR. Now. Katie scrubbed in without being asked, her fingers moving through the ritual with the precision of someone who had done this in field conditions with mortar rounds hitting 200 meters away. Soap. Water. Brush under the fingernails. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical hymn. Her hands were steady as surgical steel. In the OR, the drape went up. The attending positioned himself at the colonel's head, and Katie moved to circulating, the nurse responsible for maintaining the sterile field, for anticipating what the surgeon needed before he asked for it. The endotracheal tube. The laryngoscope. The bougie. She'd done this before, yes, but not in a hospital. Not with monitors beeping their digital reassurance. Not with an audience. The anesthesiologist ran the usual medications, succinylcholine to paralyze, etomidate to sedate, and the attending threaded the tube through the colonel's damaged airway with the casual competence of someone who had done it 5,000 times. Katie didn't look away. She watched the tube advance. She watched the monitors spike. She watched the chest rise and fall as the ventilator took over his breathing for him. The surgery lasted 47 minutes. Laryngeal reconstruction. Cartilage grafting. The kind of procedure that determined whether a man would speak again or spend the rest of his life in silence. Katie handed instruments before Dr. Hayes asked for them. Scalpel. Cautery. Retractor. Her anticipation was too good, too smooth, like she had muscle memory for this specific operation. The attending glanced at her once, a flicker of something, recognition, maybe, or just surprise, before returning his attention to the field. When it was over, they extubated the colonel and moved him to the surgical ICU with a tracheostomy in place and standing orders for Katie to monitor his vitals every 4 hours for the first 48. She took the assignment without comment. No one questioned it. New nurses took whatever was given to them. 2 days post-op, Katie was in the colonel's room conducting routine rounds at 2:33 p.m. when his chest went rigid. 1 second, he was sleeping. The next, his breathing changed. Not shallow, wrong. His sternum locked like someone had poured concrete into his lungs. Katie felt it before she saw it, that sixth sense that comes from holding too many dying people, from understanding that the human body communicates in languages doctors never teach. She turned toward the monitors and saw the trachea deviated hard to the left, his oxygen saturation already falling from 98 to 91 to 84 in the span of 4 heartbeats. Tension pneumothorax. Air trapped in the chest cavity, compressing the lung and the heart, suffocating him from the inside. The monitors were screaming now, their alarms a high-pitched wail that brought the resident running. He was a second year, competent on good days, frozen on days like this. He stood at the foot of the bed staring at the numbers as if they might rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. Katie was already moving. "Get the decompression kit. Now." Her voice had dropped an octave. The resident didn't move. Katie didn't wait for him. She walked to the crash cart herself, found the needle, a 14-gauge angiocath, and returned to the colonel's side. Her fingers located the landmarks, the second intercostal space, midclavicular line, the thin gap between his ribs where air had pooled like water in a well. The needle was cold against her palm. She positioned it perpendicular to his chest wall. One breath. She drove the needle through skin and fascia and pleura until she felt the resistance give way. The hiss of pressurized air escaped like a dying animal. The sound of survival. Within 90 seconds, his oxygen saturation climbed. 76 to 84 to 91 to 98. The monitors steadied. His breathing loosened. His eyes opened, those same green eyes from the landing pad, and for a moment, they locked directly on Katie's face. His mouth formed words, weak and almost silent through the tracheostomy, and he whispered, "That's a Kandahar cut. I'd know it anywhere." The room went so quiet you could hear the ventilator's mechanical rhythm, its steady whoosh and click like the heartbeat of some enormous machine. Katie didn't flinch. She didn't allow her expression to change by a single degree. She was already documenting the emergency on the chart, her handwriting clinical and precise, tension pneumothorax, needle decompression at 1,430 hours, immediate improvement in oxygen saturation and hemodynamic stability. The words a nurse was supposed to write. Nothing more. Nothing suggesting that the colonel had just identified her as someone from his past, someone with knowledge she wasn't supposed to possess. Dr. Mercer appeared in the doorway. He had been somewhere else in the hospital, somewhere far from this room, and yet his timing was perfect. His presence filled the doorway like something occupying space that should have been empty. He didn't say anything at first. He just watched. He watched Katie's hands as she repositioned the colonel. He watched her fingers as they typed the chart notes. He watched her face as she checked the needle's placement and secured it with tape. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost friendly, the tone he used for important conversations. "I'll handle the documentation from here, Nurse Rodriguez. Return to your other patients." It wasn't a request. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the kind of statement that dissolved the space between an order and a threat. Katie nodded once, closed out of the chart, and walked toward the door. Mercer stepped aside just enough to let her pass, his shoulder nearly brushing hers, that gesture of proximity designed to remind her of his authority. The tracheostomy tube in the colonel's throat clicked softly as he tried to call out something, but Katie was already gone, moving down the hallway toward the nurse's station where the reality of what had just happened was beginning to crystallize like frost on a window. Mercer went into the room and closed the door. Within 20 minutes, Katie heard him on the phone in his office, voice low but not low enough. "I need a medical director review." "Yes, now." The new nurse in the surgical ICU performed a procedure. "No, I don't care if it was appropriate." It was outside her scope. "And pull the colonel's complete chart." "Everything she documented." "Yes, everything." "Send it to my office before the end of shift." The first call came at 3:15 p.m. The medical director summoning her to a review meeting. The second call arrived at 3:28 p.m., HR requesting her presence in the administrator's office. Security was already stationed outside the waiting area. By 3:36 p.m., Katie Rodriguez was walking down the corridor toward her termination, her badge still clipped to her scrubs, her hand still steady, her face still composed. She passed the colonel's room and saw the door closed, a compliant nurse she didn't recognize checking his 4 lines, the chart now rewritten in someone else's handwriting. The folded flag from her fallen teammate Marco was still at home, wrapped in plastic in the bottom of her locker. She had kept it for 8 months. She had 1 hour left to decide whether to take it with her. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and desperation and the particular quiet that comes just before everything breaks. Katie kept walking. Behind her, the machines beeped their digital songs. Ahead, the administrator's office waited with security and forms and the systematic dismantling of everything she had built. But that wasn't the worst part. Within the hour, Dr. Mercer moved with the precision of a man who'd long ago mastered the art of institutional demolition. Katie was still in the trauma bay, documenting the kernel's stabilization, vitals climbing, oxygen saturation 96%, sinus rhythm holding steady, when the phone calls began. She didn't hear them, but she felt their aftermath like ripples spreading outward through still water. The first call went to the medical director. Mercer's voice, clipped and professional: "We have a scope violation. A nurse performing emergency procedures outside her credential level. I documented it, witnessed it, need this flagged." The medical director listened. The medical director always listened to Mercer. The second call went to HR: "Pattern of concerning independence. Unilateral decision-making. She's creating liability exposure." Mercer's tone carried the weight of institutional concern, the voice of a man protecting patient safety. Nobody argued with patient safety. The third call was to his billing coordinator, this one Katie would never hear about. Pull the kernel's chart. Remove the nursing notes from the past 48 hours. Code it as documentation error. Flag the file as under administrative review. 17 surgical interventions documented by Captain Katie Rodriguez, each one a data point that didn't fit the narrative of unnecessary procedures. 17 points of light, erased. The fourth call reassigned the colonel to the third floor, neurosurgery ward, under the care of a nurse named Patricia who'd never questioned a physician's judgment in her 8 years at St. Michael's. Patricia who'd filled out Mercer's billing codes without scrutiny. Patricia who understood the arrangement. Katie finished her notes at 2:06 p.m., badge clipped to her waistband, hand still steady from the adrenaline of saving a life. She didn't know yet. Her phone would vibrate in exactly 6 minutes, administrator's office. Now. No please. No explanation. Just the certainty of summons. The administrator's office smelled like expensive leather and recirculated air. 2 security officers flanked the door like bookends, their presence both deliberate and deniable. The administrator himself sat behind a desk the size of a small car, Katie's badge and hospital ID scan resting between them like evidence. "We need to discuss scope of practice," he began, his voice carrying the practice neutrality of someone trained in HR protocol. "The incident in the trauma bay yesterday. The emergency procedure. The documentation shows you acted independently, without physician authorization." Katie stood. She didn't sit. Standing gave her the appearance of engagement while maintaining psychological distance. An old interrogation technique: never let them think they own the space. "The patient was in cardiac arrest," she said quietly. "Pneumothorax. Tension. He was dying." Noted. However, protocol requires. Protocol doesn't save people who are dead. The administrator's jaw tightened. He wasn't accustomed to interruption. There's also a pattern. Detailed documentation that goes beyond standard charting. Notes that seem designed to create an audit trail. He let that hang in the recycled air. "Multiple physicians have expressed concern about your clinical approach." Katie understood what was happening. She understood it with the clarity that comes from 8 months of watching a predator operate. Mercer hadn't just made her disappear from the colonel's care. He'd built a case. Social humiliation had been stage 1, making her visible enough to dismiss, invisible enough that nobody would listen when she spoke. This was stage 4, strategic demolition through institutional process. He was competent. That was the problem. She could fight it. She had the rank to fight it. Captain Katie Rodriguez, 75th Ranger Regiment, 3 tours, 2 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star locked in a safety deposit box at the First National Bank of Raleigh. She could call JG. She could demand an investigation. She could blow her cover wide open, walk out of St. Michael's and into a JG officer's office by sunset. But that wasn't the mission. The mission wasn't her career. The mission was 8 months of evidence, billing codes, patient outcomes, unnecessary procedures on 67 veterans, at least 4 deaths that should have been investigated. The mission was the conspiracy that extended beyond Mercer, the hospital administrator who'd adjusted the billing codes, the compliance officer who'd signed off on procedures that never happened, the Department of Veterans Affairs official who'd approved reimbursement for services rendered in a dream world. One exposed captain, one burned cover, one Pentagon operation dissolved, and the whole network walked free. Pain is data. She heard Colonel Holloway's voice from Kandahar, from the field hospital in the South Tower, from a different lifetime. You feel it, you categorize it, you use it. Pain is information. I understand, Katie said. Her voice had dropped to register. The administrator didn't notice. I'll surrender my credentials. We'll need your badge and ID scan before you leave the building. Security will escort you out. There's a severance package, contingent on a non-disclosure agreement. You won't discuss this incident with staff or media. Standard protocol. Katie nodded. She slid her badge across the desk without ceremony, without protest, without the trembling that would have humanized her, made her sympathetic, made her real. She was glass. She was air. She was a shadow dissolving in afternoon light. Security walked her to her locker. She gathered her things, a photo of her son from 3 years ago, a pen that had belonged to her father, a lucky coin from her first deployment. Not much. Nothing that mattered. The locker door clicked shut with the finality of a coffin lid. That wasn't the worst metaphor. 2 hours later, Katie sat at her kitchen table in the home she rented on Williamson Avenue, the one her son complained had thin walls and a yard too small for soccer practice. The folded flag rested in her hands like something radioactive, the flag from Marco's funeral, from 3 years ago, from a day she'd tried to bury so deep it would never rise again. But it had. It had risen in the form of a Green Beret colonel, in the moment his eyes opened mid-procedure and whispered, "That's a Kandahar cut. I'd know it anywhere." The tears came without warning, without permission. Katie didn't fight them. She let them run down her face while her 14-year-old son, Miguel, stood in the kitchen doorway with his backpack still slung over one shoulder, confusion and anger warring across his features. "You're home early," he said. Not a question. An accusation. "I know, mijo." "Why? What happened? Did they fire you?" His voice cracked on the last word, the way it had been cracking for 3 years, since the day she'd knelt beside Marco's flag and told herself she'd never cry again. She'd broken that promise within weeks. She kept breaking it. Katie wanted to tell him. Wanted to say, "Your mother is a captain. Your mother has held trauma bays together while mortars fell like rain. Your mother has made choices that cost her everything because the mission matters more than she matters. Your mother is a weapon that chose to become a nurse to survive, and now even that's been taken. Instead," she said, "sometimes doing the right thing looks like losing everything. For a while. Just for a while. That doesn't make sense. I know. You could fight it. You could. I can't." Her voice was flat, final. The voice of someone who'd already calculated all the variables and accepted the outcome. There are things you don't understand. Things I can't explain. Miguel's hands balled into fists. He was tall for 14, already showing the shoulders his father's family carried, already carrying the anger that came from having a mother who wasn't quite present, who kept her distance like it was a discipline, who held secrets like they were classified documents. "That's bullshit," he said. "Language. You're letting them win. Whoever they are. You're just sitting here crying like you have no choice." Katie looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw everything she'd sacrificed to keep him alive, everything she couldn't explain, everything she was losing. There are kinds of winning that look like losing. There are battles that take years. And some of them require silence. Miguel turned and walked out. His bedroom door slammed hard enough to rattle the kitchen light. Katie sat alone with Marco's flag, her phone buzzing silently on the counter. The encrypted message had arrived at 4:15 p.m., cover compromised. Extraction protocols initiated. Mission status, failed. Not failed. Interrupted. There was a difference, though she wasn't sure Miguel would ever understand it, wasn't sure she understood it herself. She'd made the choice to stay silent, to lose her badge, to become invisible again so that the evidence could speak. The evidence would take time. The evidence would bring justice eventually. Justice always wore the face of someone who'd already chosen to suffer for it. The kitchen light hummed its fluorescent song. Outside, the Raleigh afternoon turned slowly toward evening. Somewhere in this city, Dr. Mercer was reviewing his afternoon victories, pleased with how efficiently he'd neutralized the threat. He didn't know yet. He wouldn't know, not for 2 more days, what was about to walk through the doors of St. Michael's Hospital with the force of a reckoning. 2 days. That's all it took for the hospital to swallow Katie Rodriguez whole and spit her back out as nobody. She'd spent the morning clearing her locker in the pre-dawn silence, pulling out her stethoscope, her trauma shears with the call sign etched into the handle, the small photograph of Marco in his dress blues tucked behind her name badge. The fluorescent hum of the ER felt different now, not a workplace, but a mausoleum of her own making. She moved like a ghost through corridors she'd walked in purpose, in mission, in absolute conviction that her silence would protect the evidence. The silence had protected nothing. Her hands were steady as she folded her scrubs, muscle memory from 18 years of compartmentalizing pain, crisis, the weight of secrets that could topple empires. But her son didn't understand steady. Her son understood that his mother had surrendered without a fight. The lobby doors burst open at 7:51 a.m. Her 14-year-old, breathless, holding the shadow box like a weapon, like a prayer. His voice cracked across the empty entrance, "Mom, they need to see these." The box gleamed, mahogany with brass corners, the medals inside catching light like accusations. Katie's hand stilled mid-motion. Time fractured. In that moment, the lobby transformed. Staff who'd been trained to look away suddenly looked. Nurses paused their charts. A resident froze mid-stride. The air itself seemed to compress, waiting for something it couldn't name. And then the colonel stepped forward. He moved with the deliberate grace of a man who'd learned precision under fire, for pole in one hand like a weapon he refused to acknowledge as weakness. His hospital gown gaped at the shoulders, revealing the topography of scars, Kandahar written in pale ridgelines across his collarbone. Medical advice had ordered him to bed rest. He'd ordered himself to bear witness. "Captain Rodriguez," he said, and the title hung in the air like a detonation. Just those 2 words transformed her from terminated nurse to something the room hadn't been prepared to see. The young Marine from Environmental Services, the one who'd been sweeping trauma bays when Katie taught the nurses how to hold a trauma line, who'd listened to her explain triage to a med student she'd caught crying in the supply closet, stepped forward with the solemnity of an honor guard. He opened the shadow box. His voice, when he spoke, carried the gravity of official record. The Silver Star is awarded to Captain Katie Rodriguez for conspicuous gallantry under fire in Kandahar, where she held a trauma bay for 11 hours during a sustained assault, treating 43 casualties, maintaining a 0 mortality rate despite incoming fire and dwindling supplies. He paused. The silence was so complete you could hear the rain beginning outside, percussion against the skylight like applause. He continued, Bronze Star. 2 Purple Hearts. Navy Commendation with Combat V for Valor. Each medal caught light as he raised them. Not accusations. Proof. Dr. Mercer's control didn't fray. It shattered. He rushed forward, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, calculation, a man watching the architecture of his power collapse in real time. His hand shot out for the shadow box. This is highly inappropriate. This is a private personnel matter. Security should be removing her from the building, not, his voice climbed, desperation bleeding through polish. Katie didn't move. She watched him try to grab the frame, watched his fingers close on air as the Marine pivoted, protecting the medals with the instinct of a soldier protecting a brother. Mercer's composure fractured like tempered glass under impact. She violated scope of practice. She performed procedures without authorization. I have documentation. I have her file marked for termination. You cannot come in here and make heroes out of protocol violations. The elevator chimed. A two-star general emerged with the unhurried presence of a man who'd walked through decades of war. His dress uniform caught light like weaponized precision, every ribbon, every star positioned with absolute authority. He took one look at the shadow box. One look at Katie's face. One look at the medals bearing her name in official script. His right hand rose. His body snapped to attention, not the mechanical angle of parade ground salutes, but the full body recognition of a warrior acknowledging a warrior. His salute held the weight of respect earned in places civilians didn't ask about. The gesture was aimed at Katie, but it was directed at Dr. Mercer. It was a public statement. It was the room choosing sides. Mercer stumbled backward as if struck. The hospital operator's voice crackled through the main line with the precision of federal machinery in motion. Incoming call for Captain Rodriguez. This is the Pentagon. I have you routed to the general present. The operator's tone suggested this wasn't the first secure call of her morning. The general took the phone from the desk nurse, listened to something Katie couldn't hear, nodded once, and turned to the room with the calm of a man delivering what had already been decided. The classified operation, Nightingale, is confirmed complete. Captain Rodriguez's surveillance package on the Mercer billing operation shows criminal conduct exceeding scope of our initial investigation. Federal team is en route. ETA 12 minutes. He handed the phone to Katie. She didn't take it. She didn't need to. The call had already done its work. But that wasn't the worst part for Dr. Mercer. Not yet. The IT director emerged from the back corridor like a verdict-made flesh, Gulf War veteran, quiet, the kind of man who knew how to watch things without being seen. He carried a USB drive held between his thumb and forefinger with the reverence of evidence. I've been monitoring the system for 8 months, he said to no one and everyone. Copying every file deletion. Every altered patient record. Every access to the billing system at 4 a.m. when Drive Mercer thought nobody was watching. He handed the drive to the general, who passed it to the FBI agents now visible in the entrance, 2 men in suits that looked like they'd been tailored for carrying warrants. The IT director turned to Mercer with something close to pity. I watched you delete 847 fraudulent procedure codes. I watched you pressure the anesthesiologist to backdate reports. I watched you change diagnoses to justify level 5 surgeries on veterans who needed physical therapy. He paused. I have surveillance footage of all of it. The agents moved forward with the unhurried precision of men executing a plan that had been prepared for weeks. One of them read from a laminated card, Dr. Samuel Mercer, you're under arrest for wire fraud, healthcare fraud, and violation of the Veterans Benefits Act. You have the right to remain silent. Mercer's face went pale. Not angry now. Panicking. This is insane. Those patients needed those procedures. I'm a surgeon. I made clinical decisions based on medical necessity. The general's voice cut through like a blade. Captain Rodriguez performed emergency medical procedures under Pentagon orders as part of a classified national security operation. You saw her training and you tried to destroy her rather than report it. You then altered patient records to conceal evidence of your fraud. He stepped closer, his presence pressing the air from the room. You committed crimes against veterans who've already sacrificed everything. In my experience, that's the kind of crime that doesn't get forgiven. Security escorted Mercer toward the exit, his hands shaking now, his voice cracking into appeals nobody listened to anymore. Staff lined the hallways in absolute silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The nurses he'd humiliated, the residents he'd intimidated, the patients he'd exploited, all watching him walk toward consequence with nothing left to negotiate. The colonel remained standing despite his presence a statement. Katie watched Mercer disappear through the automatic doors where unmarked federal vehicles waited like sharks. She felt no triumph. Just the weight of necessary mathematics, one predator removed from a system designed to protect the vulnerable, and how many more were still swimming beneath the surface, waiting to be seen. Her son pressed his hand against the glass of the entrance, watching the FBI agents load Mercer into the back seat of a dark sedan. Katie placed her hand over his, her scarred hand, the one that had held lives together through 11 hours of incoming fire, through months of impossible silence. "He hurt people," she said quietly. "People who'd already given everything they had. The system's supposed to catch that. Usually it doesn't. Today it did." The colonel approached with the careful steps of a man still healing. "Kandahar cut saved my life twice," he said. "Once on the table. Once when it proved who you were." He smiled, and the expression held the weight of shared survival. "Welcome back, Captain." 6 months later, though that part wasn't written yet, existing only as future in the minds of those who understood how these stories end, Katie would stand in the new VA oversight office in Raleigh, her captain's bars polished on her collar, her son beside her wearing her silver star on a chain she'd given him. Through the loading bay window, she would see Dr. Mercer in an orange safety vest, loading bandages into a medical supply van, working off his restitution one box at a time, his hands, once confident in destroying her, now trembling as he checked inventory. Marco's folded flag would rest in a place of honor at that new office, ensuring no veteran would ever again become a line item in somebody else's profit margin. But that was tomorrow's story. Today, Katie Rodriguez stood in the lobby of St. Michael's Hospital, watching Dr. Mercer disappear into federal custody, and breathed for the first time in 8 months. The ones who have seen the worst often give the most. Her son squeezed her hand. The colonel nodded. And Katie walked forward into what came next. If you made it this far, you know this story isn't over, it's just transitioning into something larger. Subscribe to see how Captain Rodriguez rebuilds a system designed to protect those who've served. And comment, what would you have done in that lobby when the truth finally broke through the silence?